Hi, I'm Nish from YB Aligned, and for this week's Movement Monday, we are looking at the pelvis. Pelvis is made up with a number of different bones. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but we've got three main sections. We've got the two sides and then the back. The sides, you can see we have these ridges here where we have those hip bones that stick out at the front of the body, and also these sockets, which is where our thigh bone goes in to make the hip joint. And at the back, we have our sacrum, which goes down to have our little tailbone, our coccyx, and this part here is where our spine inserts into the pelvis. The pelvis will sit here, and it can move in three different planes of motion, and that's going to look something like this. In our sagittal or side-on plane, the pelvis rolls forwards and backwards. I'm not going to show you the exact correct ranges, but you can see here it will roll forwards and over, and this is our anterior pelvic tilt. And then it's going to roll backwards with the coccyx tucking under, and this is our posterior pelvic tilt. In our frontal or front-on plane, the pelvis is going to act like a seesaw. So as one side starts to lower, the other side comes into the air. You'd be able to see that on the body with these hip bones at the front of the body. One goes upwards and one goes down, and then it goes to the other side as well. And then in our transverse or rotational plane, the pelvis is able to rotate to each side. So imagining you were standing in the middle of a big clock, the pelvis would start facing 12 o'clock and then it would rotate round towards 3 o'clock and towards 9 o'clock. Before we move on to how we can get those movements back into our body, it's important to note that the pelvis has the ability to be on axis or off axis. And what we mean by this is you can see this red line running down the center of the body side on, connecting the ear, the shoulder, the pelvis, and the ankle. Now, the pelvis can often shift forward or backwards of this central line, dependent on your posture patterns. And if it is off axis, then inevitably something else will be off axis too, and it might well lose the ability to move well. Because of this off-axis positioning, what can happen is when we're trying to do that anterior and posterior pelvic tilt, so that side-on pelvic tilt, the pelvis can end up being pushed forward or backwards and making a lot of discomfort in either the hips or the lower back. So to prevent that, you're going to use the floor, and you're simply going to lie on your back, so face up with your knees bent and your feet planted on the floor. And then you're going to simply just think about rocking that pelvis forwards and over. So it's like we're trying to get those hip bones, the ones at the front of the pelvis, sticking out, tucked down towards our thighs. And then we're going to rock the pelvis backwards and under. So you can think about that little tailbone, the coccyx, tucking under between the legs. And so that's forward and over into anterior pelvic tilt, and then backwards and under into that posterior pelvic tilt. To move the pelvis in the front-on plane, we're going to use a wall, but that's because we want to stay on axis in that side-on plane at the same time. We don't want to be pushing the pelvis forward while we're moving in the front-on plane. So you're going to stand with your heels a couple of inches against the wall. Your bottom, shoulders and head can touch the wall. And then you're simply going to let one knee start to bend. And as you bend that knee, because everything's connected, the thigh bone is being pulled down to the floor, and that pulls that side of my pelvis down to the floor as well. You'll see as I straighten my leg, the pelvis pops back up into the air on that side. So again, we're pulling that knee or bending that knee, pulling that thigh bone to the floor, which brings the pelvis down on that side, and we can pop it back up. One thing to just be careful of is as you do this, you want to stay on a nice central plane so that your legs are staying directly underneath your pelvis. You don't want to be bending and going off to the side, because that's going to change what's happening through your spine as well. So just keep it nice and neutral, and it is just the knees bending one at a time to tilt that pelvis up and down like a seesaw. And for our transverse or rotational plane, twisty-turny, you're going to just simply be sending your pelvis round the clock face. Now, this can be tricky for some people to do it on its own. So initially, start with the pelvis and the whole upper body rotating one way. So if you are facing 12 o'clock, you can start to think about rotating towards 1, 2, and 3 o'clock. Then work your way back round the clock face to 12. And try going 11, 10, 9 o'clock. Try to just be careful that you're not leaning forward or back or pushing the pelvis forward or back when you're doing that. We know we want to be nice and on axis side on. And if you want to make it a little bit harder, try keeping your chest facing forward and simply only letting the pelvis rotate from side to side. So that is our wonderful pelvis. You now know how to move that pelvis in 3 planes of motion, and you also know how important it is to keep that pelvis stacked directly in a line underneath the shoulders and above the ankles. We don't want it drifting forward or back and putting too much tension through the hips and lower back. And that was this week's Movement Monday. If you liked it, be sure to tick the like and do subscribe so you don't miss out on next week's Movement Monday.